The town of Redemption Creek held its breath when Barnaby Trent walked by. He owned the bank, the saloon, and the fear in his daughter Rosalie's eyes. He was a man who ruled with an iron fist and at home with a heavy leather belt. His power was absolute, his word was law, and his cruelty was a secret everyone knew, but no one dared name. But he never counted on the quiet drifter Jonah Shaw, who wandered into town with nothing but a horse and a past. He never counted on the sound of a door breaking open. And he never counted on the moment a stranger would snap his weapon of control, look his daughter in the eye, and change her life forever. The dust in Redemption Creek, Texas, didn't just settle. It was crushed into submission. It clung to the cracked leather of saddles, the thirsty planks of the boardwalk, and the spirits of the people. And the boot that did the crushing most often belonged to Barnaby Trent. Trent was a monolith of a man built not from muscle but from sheer unyielding presence. He'd arrived 20 years prior with a mysterious fortune and had proceeded to buy the town piece by piece. He owned the bank that held everyone's mortgages, the general store that set all the prices, and the Red Garter saloon where men drank away the wages he paid them. But his most prized possession was his daughter Rosalie. Rosalie Trent was 19, but her eyes were decades older. She was a pale watercolor in a world of harsh oils moving through her father's grand, suffocating house like a ghost. She was rarely seen in town, and when she was, it was always on her father's arm, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground. The town pitied her. They whispered about her mother who had fallen ill and passed away a decade ago, though old Dr. Peterson had drunkenly mumbled once that he'd never seen an illness that looked so much like a broken spirit. Trent's control was total. He chose her dresses, vetted the few appropriate families she could visit, and corrected her posture at dinner with a sharp rap of his knuckles on the table. He called it protection. He called it fatherly care. Rosalie, who knew the sting of his open palm for speaking out of turn, knew it by its real name, tyranny. Into this pressurized, silent town rode Jonah Shaw. He was the antithesis of Barnaby Trent. Where Trent was solid and imposing, Jonah was lean and fluid, moving with the easy grace of a man who owned nothing and was therefore owned by nothing. He rode a tired-looking buckskin and led a pack mule. He stopped at the livery run by a nervous man named Parsons. Looking for work. Jonah said, his voice low and raspy, like dry leaves skittering over rock. Good with horses, can mend a fence or a roof. Parsons looked over Jonah's worn duster and the handle of the Colt at his hip. Not much work, mister. Mr. Trent, he handles most of the hiring. I'm not looking for most, I'm looking for any, Jonah replied. He was hired, given a cot in the hayloft, and paid in meals and a few coins a day. He was invisible, just another drifter. And that's exactly how he saw what others had trained themselves to ignore. He saw it on his third day. Rosalie was leaving the general store, her father a step behind, carrying a small parcel. A gust of wind, a rare, rebellious thing in Redemption Creek, plucked the bonnet from her head, sending it tumbling into the dusty street. Before she could even react, Barnaby Trent's voice cracked like a whip. Rosalie clumsy. Pick it up. She flinched a full-body recoil and scurried into the street. As she bent to retrieve it, a wagon loaded with barrels thundered around the corner. The driver yelled, but Rosalie froze, paralyzed by the competing terrors of the wagon and her father. In a blur of motion, Jonah Shaw moved from the livery doorway. He scooped her up by the waist, pulling her back onto the boardwalk an instant before the wagon horses stampeded through the space she had occupied. He set her down. She was shaking her face, paper white. "Thank you," she whispered, a voice so small He barely heard it. Jonah just nodded his eyes, scanning her, noting the faint, yellowing bruise on her temple, partially hidden by her hair. Barnaby Trent stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. His anger wasn't for the near accident. It was for the intervention. It was for the touch. "Get your hands off my daughter," Trent snarled. Jonah stepped back, his hands held up, palms out. "Sir, the wagon." "I saw what happened." Trent lied his eyes like chips of ice. "She was perfectly safe. You will not lay hands on her again. Do you understand me, boy?" Jonah's gaze was steady. He didn't look at Trent. He looked at Rosalie, who was now trembling for a different reason. She wouldn't meet his gaze. "I understand," Jonah said, his voice quiet. Trent grabbed Rosalie's arm, his fingers digging in. "We are going home. You will not leave the house for a week. Your clumsiness has embarrassed me." As he dragged her away, Rosalie cast one quick, terrified glance back at Jonah. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a look of warning. He hadn't saved her. He had just signed her death warrant. Jonah watched them go, the dust settling back into its familiar, oppressed state. And for the first time in 5 years, the quiet drifter felt the cold burn of a purpose he'd long tried to bury. The week of Rosalie's confinement was a silent, simmering hell. Barnaby Trent paced the halls of his home, the heavy, rhythmic thud of his boots on the oak floors a constant looming threat. He said little, which was always worse than his yelling. The silence was a canvas upon which Rosalie's terror painted its most vivid pictures. He was furious, not about the wagon, but about the look. He'd seen the stable hand, that piece of human refuse, look at his daughter. And he'd seen his daughter. She hadn't recoiled. In that split second of the rescue, she had leaned into the stranger. It was a betrayal of an unspoken law. Her fear, her obedience, her very existence belonged to him. On the 7th night, a storm broke. Rain lashed the windows, a frantic, angry sound that matched the atmosphere inside. Trent had been drinking. He sat at his large desk in the study, staring at the ledger he wasn't reading. "Rosalie," he called out. His voice was thick. She entered, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Yes, father." He stood, his shadow swallowing her. He was holding it, the belt. It was thick black leather, wide and heavy with a large ornate silver buckle. It was not the belt he wore. It was the one he kept in his desk drawer. The corrector, he called it. "You embarrassed me," he stated. It wasn't an accusation, it was a verdict. "Father, I tripped. The wind. You embarrassed me," he repeated, stepping closer. "In the street. With that filth. You let him put his hands on you. You looked at him. He saved me." She whispered the words, desperate. "The wagon. I would have handled the wagon." He roared, his composure shattering. The smell of whiskey washed over her. "You are mine, Rosalie. Your body, your shame, your obedience. It is all mine. And I will remind you of what happens when you forget." He raised the belt high, the silver buckle catching the dim lamplight. Rosalie didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just squeezed her eyes shut and turned a conditioned reflex, presenting her back, as she had been taught to do, since she was a child. The first blow was a formality she had to endure before the real pain began. But the whistling sound of the leather cutting the air was interrupted. Crash. The study door, a heavy oak barrier, splintered off its hinges, slamming against the wall. Jonah Shaw stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his duster dripping on the fine carpet. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were on fire. Trent froze his arm, still raised the belt in his fist. He was stunned by the sheer audacity. "Get out!" he bellowed. "This is a private family matter." Jonah walked forward. He didn't run. He just advanced, each step, measured and deliberate. "I said, get out!" Trent shouted his rage, transferring to this new target. He swung the belt not at Rosalie, but at Jonah. Jonah caught the belt mid-air, yanking it from Trent's hand with a powerful twist of his wrist. Trent stumbled, his eyes wide with disbelief. Jonah looked at the weapon in his hand. He saw the worn leather, dark with use. He saw the heavy buckle. Then he looked at Rosalie, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with a terrifying, dangerous new emotion, hope. A man who rules his family with this, Jonah said, his voice a low growl, is no man at all. He put one boot on the belt, grabbed the other end, and pulled. The leather was thick, but his strength was desperate and focused. With a sound like a gunshot, the leather snapped the buckle, half flying across the room to clatter against the fireplace. Barnaby Trent stared at the broken pieces of his power. He was speechless. Jonah tossed the two halves of the belt onto the desk. He turned to Rosalie, who was breathing in short, sharp gasps. He didn't touch her. He didn't grab her. He just held out his hand, palm up. "He will kill you for this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He'll have to," Jonah said simply. "But he won't get to kill you." He took one step back toward the broken doorway. "Come with me. Now. We ride north. We don't look back." It was a choice. Her father, the devil she knew, stood gasping with rage, his power momentarily broken. This man, the devil, she didn't offered an escape into a storm, into a world that was just as dangerous but different. "He will hunt us," she said. "Let him," Jonah replied. Rosalie looked at her father's face, contorted with a promise of murder. Then she looked at the open, stormy darkness behind Jonah. She took one step, then another. She walked past her father, past the broken belt, and took Jonah Shaw's hand. "My coat," she whispered. "No time," Jonah said, pulling his own duster off and wrapping it around her thin shoulders. It swallowed her whole. "The horses are ready. Go out the back. Head for the livery. I'll be right behind you." What are you doing?" Jonah looked at Barnaby Trent, who was now reaching for the poker by the fireplace. "Making sure we have a head start." Jonah shoved a heavy bookshelf over, blocking the study door. He sprinted down the hall as Trent roared inarticulately, trying to climb over the barrier. Jonah was out the front door, into the rain, vaulting onto his buckskin. Rosalie was already on the mule, her hands clutching the pommel. "Ha!" Jonah yelled, slapping the rump of her mule. They thundered out of the livery, out of town, swallowing the main street in a spray of mud and rain. They were gone. Rosalie Trent was gone. In his ruined study, Barnaby Trent finally scrambled over the bookshelf, his face purple with rage. He ran to his gun cabinet. He was no longer a man. He was a force of nature. He wasn't just going to get his daughter back. He was going to wipe Jonah Shaw from the face of the earth. Dawn broke cold and grey, the storm having washed the world clean, leaving it raw and exposed. Rosalie and Jonah had ridden hard for 6 hours, pushing north through the canyons and gullies of the Texas Panhandle, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and Redemption Creek. They stopped only when the mule Rosalie was riding began to falter. Jonah pulled them into a shallow arroyo, hidden by thick mesquite. "We rest here," he said, swinging down. His movements were stiff. Rosalie slid off the mule, her legs buckling. She was bruised, soaked, and vibrating with a combination of cold and adrenaline. The reality of what she had done was crashing down on her. She hadn't just run away. She had declared war. "He'll send the sheriff," she said, her teeth chattering as she huddled in Jonah's duster. "Sheriff Brody. He's on my father's payroll. He'll have a posse." "I know," Jonah said. He was checking the horse's hooves, his focus absolute. "Brody's not the one I'm worried about." What do you mean, your father? A man like that. He won't trust the law, not for this. This is personal. He'll hire a tracker. He'll pay any price. Rosalie watched him. This quiet man who had shattered her life in order to save it. Why did you do it? You don't even know me. Jonah stopped his work. He looked at the rocky wall of the arroyo, his gaze distant. I knew someone like you. Once. A long time ago. He didn't elaborate. He just added, no one deserves that. He handed her a canteen and a piece of hardtack. Eat. We ride again in 30 minutes. Back in Redemption, Creek Barnaby Trent was a whirlwind of controlled venom. He had, as Jonah predicted, gone straight to Sheriff Brody. But he hadn't reported an abduction. He'd reported a theft. He took her! Trent bellowed in the sheriff's office. That drifter Shaw, he charmed her, filled her head with lies, and took her across state lines. It's kidnapping. Sheriff Brody, a portly man with a perpetually sweating brow, nodded nervously. Yes, Mr. Trent. I'll get a posse together right away. We'll ride. You will do nothing. Trent slammed his fist on the desk. Your posse is useless. They're farmers and drunkards. I want a professional. I want a man who can find a snake in a sandstorm. Brody swallowed. Mr. Trent, I don't know. You know exactly who I mean. Trent said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Send a wire to the U.S. Marshal's office in Fort Smith. Ask for the best tracker they use, the one they call when the trail goes cold. I want him. Brody's face went pale. You mean Rourke, Sir Gideon Rourke? He's not just a tracker, he's a bloodhound. He'll bring them back, yes, but he won't bring them back gentle. I'm not paying for gentle, Trent said, his eyes void of all light. I'm paying for back, and I'm paying a $1,000 bonus for Jonah Shaw, dead or alive, preferably dead. The telegram was sent. The bounty was posted. Within 2 days, Gideon Rourke arrived in Redemption Creek. Rourke was Jonah's opposite. He was tall, dressed in a clean, dark suit, and rode a magnificent black stallion. He looked more like a preacher than a bounty hunter, save for the twin, pearl-handled revolvers on his hips and the cold, analytical intelligence in his eyes. He didn't speak to Brody. He went straight to Trent. He listened to the story, his face impassive. Then he went to the livery. He spent an hour in the hayloft where Jonah had slept. He looked at his cot, a whittled piece of wood on the floor, the brand of feed. Then he went to the Trent house. He stood in the ruined study, looking at the broken belt. He picked up the silver buckle. He broke it with his hands, Rourke observed to himself. His voice was soft, educated. He knelt by the muddy footprints near the door. He studied them. Then he stood, walked to his horse, and mounted. Sheriff Brody ran up. Mr. Rourke, where are you going? Do you want the posse? Rourke looked down at the sheriff as if he were an insect. Sheriff, I'm going to find them. Your posse would only slow me down and get themselves killed. Stay here. Wait for my wire. He turned his horse north, sniffing the air, and set off at a steady, unhurried pace. He was not a pursuer. He was a reckoning. For a week, Jonah and Rosalie rode. They avoided towns, crossed rivers to hide their trail, and slept in cold camps. Jonah taught Rosalie how to bank a fire so it produced almost no smoke, how to listen for the sound of a horse 5 miles away, how to handle a rifle. She was a quick study. The terror that had defined her life was being burned away, replaced by a sharp, resilient core of determination. She stopped flinching at shadows. She started watching the horizon. On the 8th day, they were making their way through a high rocky pass, aiming for the New Mexico territory. Jonah suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand. What? Rosalie whispered. Get down, he said, his voice tense. He dismounted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. He pointed. Across the canyon, maybe half a mile away, a lone rider sat on a ridge, silhouetted against the morning sun. He was perfectly still, watching them. "Is it him?" Rosalie asked, her heart hammering. "The tracker." Jonah stared, his knuckles white on the rifle. He didn't answer for a long time. The figure on the ridge just sat there, making no move to attack. "Jonah, get behind the rocks," Jonah commanded, his voice strained. "Do not come out." "Who is it?" she insisted. Jonah finally looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't identify. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition. "I know him," Jonah said, his voice grim. "His name is Gideon Rourke, and he's not just a tracker. We used to ride together." The name hung in the thin mountain air, heavy and toxic. Gideon Rourke. Rosalie's blood ran cold. "Ride with you? You mean, like a posse?" Jonah's eyes never left the figure on the ridge. "No, not like a posse." The confession was torn from him, low and ragged. "Before I was a drifter, I was something else. I rode with a gang, the Cimarron Boys. We worked out of the Oklahoma Panhandle. Rourke. Gideon was our leader. He wasn't just a tracker. He was a planner. He was smart, too smart for the life." Rosalie felt the ground shift beneath her. The man who had saved her from one monster was himself a monster to someone else. "You were an outlaw. You robbed banks, trains. All of it," Jonah said, his voice flat with self-loathing. "Rourke was the brains. I was the gun. We were good. Too good. Until the last job. A bank in Abilene. It went wrong. Rourke's plan. He wanted to use dynamite on the vault, but he used too much. It brought the ceiling down. A teller. A young woman. She didn't make it out." He swallowed the memory raw. "I saw her. She looked like you. Trapped. Terrified. After that I couldn't. I took my share, and I walked. I told Rourke I was done. He told me no one gets to be done. Not with what we knew. I left anyway." "So he's here for the bounty?" Rosalie asked. "No," Jonah said, his gaze hardening. "The bounty's an excuse. He's here for me. He doesn't forgive betrayal. He sees me as a loose end." The figure on the ridge raised a hand, not in a wave, but a signal. From behind, a line of rocks below him, 3 other men rose, rifles in hand. Rourke hadn't come alone. "He's pinned us," Jonah said, pulling Rosalie behind a large boulder. "This pass is a bottleneck. We can't go forward. We have to go back, but he'll be waiting." "So what do we do?" "He's smart," Jonah mused, "but he's proud. He thinks he's a general. He won't just rush us. He'll try to flank us. He'll send 2 men around the west side of this pass, 1 around the east, and he'll provide cover fire from the ridge." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do," Jonah said. He checked his revolver, then his rifle. He had maybe 30 rounds in total. "Here's what happens now. I'm going to draw his fire. I need you to take the mule and the horse. Go back down the way we came fast. There's a ravine about a mile back. Hide in it. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." "No," Rosalie said. The word was firm. It surprised them both. "What? I'm not leaving you. I'm not hiding. I've spent my entire life hiding. He'll kill you. He'll kill me faster if I'm worried about you." "I can shoot," she said, grabbing the rifle from the mule's scabbard. "You taught me. I'm not a good shot, but I can make a noise." Jonah looked at her, the set of her jaw, the way she held the rifle, the fear in her eyes that was being eclipsed by a cold, hard rage. She was no longer Barnaby Trent's porcelain doll. "All right," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "All right. See that cluster of rocks to the east about 100 yards?" She nodded. The man he sends that way will be the least experienced. Rourke always puts the greenhorn on the easy flank. I need you to get there. Stay low. When he comes, you fire. Don't even try to hit him. Just make him take cover. It'll buy me the seconds I need to deal with the other two. And Rourke. I'll deal with Rourke last, Jonah said. Rosalie nodded her hands, shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle. But she didn't run. She took a deep breath, crouched low, and began to scramble over the rocks. The instant she moved, the first shot cracked the silence. A chip of stone exploded from the rock above her head. "Rourke, go!" Jonah yelled, and he returned fire, aiming high on the ridge to force Rourke to duck. The battle for the pass began. It was chaos. Bullets whined and ricocheted, the echoes sounding like a dozen men shooting. Jonah moved with a speed Rosalie had never seen, a deadly economical dance. He fired 2 shots toward the west flank, ducked as Rourke's rifle answered, and rolled. Rosalie made it to her position. She hid her heart, feeling like it would burst from her chest. She waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then she heard it. The scrape of a boot on gravel. A man, young with a panicked look, was creeping along the path. He was holding his rifle, his eyes darting toward Jonah's position. He hadn't seen her. Rosalie raised her rifle. She remembered what Jonah said. Just make him take cover. She aimed at the rock wall above the man and pulled the trigger. Boom! The rifle butt slammed into her shoulder, a brutal kick that sent a shock of pain up her arm. The man yelled in surprise and dived behind a scrub pine, firing wildly in her direction. It was just the distraction Jonah needed. With the east flank shooter pinned, Jonah turned his full attention west. 2 men were advancing. "Now!" Jonah yelled, and he burst from cover, firing his revolver, not his rifle. Pop, pop, pop. He was close, fast, and brutal. 1 man cried out and fell. The other turned to run, but Jonah's 4th shot took him in the leg. He collapsed. "Gideon!" The wounded man screamed. "He got me." From the ridge, Rourke's rifle roared. He wasn't aiming at Jonah. He was aiming at his own man. The man's scream was cut short. Rourke was cleaning up loose ends. Jonah froze, horrified. He killed his own man. "Jonah, look out!" Rosalie shrieked. The 3rd shooter, the one she had pinned, had used the moment to abandon his cover. He was running not at Jonah, but at her. He had seen her. He was young, but he was desperate, and he knew the girl was the weaker target. Rosalie fumbled with the rifle, trying to reload, her fingers slick with sweat. He was 20 yards away. 10. He raised his pistol. A shot rang out, but it wasn't Rosalie's. The young man stopped, a look of blank surprise on his face. He looked down at the red flower blooming on his chest, then fell forward. Jonah stood on the path, his revolver smoking. Silence. The wind whistled through the pass. 2 men were dead. 1 was wounded and running. And on the ridge, Gideon Rourke stood up. He wasn't hiding. He took off his hat and nodded, a gesture of dark respect. Then deliberately, he mounted his black stallion and rode away. He didn't retreat. He vanished. "He's gone," Rosalie breathed, sinking to her knees. "No," Jonah said, reloading his revolver. "He's not gone. He's just changed the board. He knows I'm still fast. He knows you'll fight. This was a test. Now he's going to find a new way to break us. He'll go where we're most vulnerable." "Where?" Jonah looked at her, his face grim. "He's not going to try to outgun me. He's going to go to the one place we have to go for supplies. He's going to wait for us in the next town." The town was called Esperanza. Hope. It was a tiny, dusty settlement, tucked into a fold of the New Mexico hills, little more than a single street, with a cantina, a general store, and a boarding house run by a woman named Maeve Callahan. Maeve was a legend. She was a woman in her 60s with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen everything. It was rumored she had come west with a wagon train, buried 2 husbands, and had once stared down a silver-badged marshal, telling him he couldn't arrest one of her girls without a warrant signed by the president. Her boarding house was known as a refuge for women who were running from bad debts, bad men, or bad pasts. It was the only place Jonah knew to go. They arrived 2 days after the gunfight, exhausted and on their last nerve. Jonah sold his pack mule for supplies and a room. Maeve met them at the door, a shotgun resting in the crook of her arm. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice like gravel. "We need a room," Jonah said, "and we need shelter. We're being hunted." Maeve looked at Jonah, her eyes assessing, critical. Then her gaze shifted to Rosalie. She saw the duster that was too big, the fine spun hair matted with trail dust, the rifle she carried, and the deep, haunting fear in her eyes. Maeve's expression softened just a fraction. "Hunted by who?" "My father," Rosalie said, her voice finding its strength. "And a bounty hunter named Gideon Rourke." At the name, Rourke Maeve's eyes narrowed. "Rourke, that snake. He's all poison. You bring his shadow to my door. We have nowhere else," Rosalie pleaded. Maeve studied her for a long, silent moment. "The man sleeps in the barn. She stays in the house. Room 2, food's at 6. You pay in cash. And you," she said, jabbing a finger at Jonah, "you bring a gunfight here. I'll be the one to end it." For a week, Esperanza was peace. It was a fragile, borrowed peace, but it was real. Rosalie helped Maeve in the kitchen, mended linens and talked. For the first time in her life, she talked. She told Maeve everything. The house, her father, the belt. Maeve just nodded her hands, kneading dough with a fierce rhythm. "Men like your father," Maeve said, "they ain't strong. They're hollow. They gotta fill themselves up with other people's fear, or they'd just collapse. The best thing you ever did was run. The second best thing you'll ever do is learn to stand." Under Maeve's tough tutelage, Rosalie changed. The haunted look began to fade. She learned to laugh a rusty, unused sound. She practiced with the rifle at a range behind the house, her shoulder aching, but her aim getting steadier. Jonah, meanwhile, was a coiled spring. He worked repairing Maeve's stable roof, fixing a broken wagon wheel. But he never relaxed. He watched the ridges. He watched everyone who came into town. He and Rosalie spoke in quiet, stolen moments. A bond was forming, forged in shared danger. He was no longer just her rescuer. She was no longer just his burden. They were partners. "He'll come," Jonah said one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky a bloody red. "I know," Rosalie said, standing beside him, "but this time I won't be hiding behind a rock." The peace shattered on a Tuesday. A U.S. Marshal, Thomas Pike, rode into town with a deputy. He wasn't Sheriff Brody. This man was lean professional and carried the unbending authority of federal law. He dismounted, adjusted his hat, and walked straight into Maeve's boarding house. Jonah and Rosalie were in the kitchen. Maeve met the marshal in the front parlor. "Ma'am," the marshal said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Marshal Pike. I'm looking for a man named Jonah Shaw and a young woman, Rosalie Trent. We have a warrant for his arrest. Kidnapping and theft." "Never heard of 'em," Maeve said, blocking the doorway. "Ma'am, I have a witness that saw them heading this way, and I have this." He produced a piece of paper. Not the warrant, a telegram. Maeve read it. Her face went grey. "What is it?" Jonah asked, stepping out from the kitchen, his hand near his gun. Marshal Pike looked at him. "You Jonah Shaw." "Who sent the wire?" Jonah asked. "Gideon Rourke," the marshal said. "Sent it from Santa Fe. Said he'd cornered you here. Said you were armed and dangerous and had taken a young woman hostage. He also sent this." He held up a second wire. This one was from Abilene. It was a 10-year-old wanted poster. Jonah Shaw. Wanted for armed robbery and the murder of a bank teller. $5,000 reward. Jonah's blood turned to ice. Rourke hadn't come to Esperanza. He had sent the law instead. He wasn't just trying to collect a bounty. He was trying to get Jonah hanged. "Marshal," Jonah said, his voice low. "The kidnapping, it's a lie. Her father, he's the one. You have to listen to—" "I listen to the warrant, son," Pike said, his hand dropping to his own pistol. "And I listen to a wanted poster for murder. Now you can come quiet or I can take you hard. Your choice." "He's not a murderer," Rosalie cried, running into the parlor. "That man Rourke, he's the one, he's lying." "Rosalie, stay back," Jonah commanded. "Young lady, are you Rosalie Trent?" the marshal asked. "Yes, but— And are you here with him, against your will? He's a dangerous man, miss. You can be honest. We'll protect you." This was Rourke's trap. It was perfect. He had painted Jonah as a killer and a kidnapper. If Rosalie told the truth, that she was with him willingly, she'd be an accomplice to a wanted murderer. If she lied and said he'd taken her, they'd hang him. Jonah saw the trap spring shut. He couldn't let her be branded an outlaw. He couldn't let her be dragged into his past. He made his choice. "She's not with me willingly," Jonah said, his voice dead. Rosalie's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Jonah, no. I took her," Jonah said, raising his hands slowly. "I forced her to come with me. She's innocent. It's all on me." "Jonah, don't do this," Rosalie was screaming, tears streaming down her face. "He's lying to protect me. Marshal, please. I've heard enough," Marshal Pike said, his eyes hard with pity for Rosalie. He drew his gun. "Turn around, Shaw. Hands behind your back." As the deputy moved in with the irons, Rosalie looked at Jonah. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He had saved her from her father, only to be destroyed by his own past, by the ghost from the Cimarron. As they let him out, Maeve caught Rosalie's arm. "It ain't over, child," she whispered, her eyes fierce. "He's given up. He's a fool," Maeve snapped. "But he's not the only one who can fight. Rourke sent the law. He didn't send your father." A look of terrible understanding passed between the two women. "Marshal," Maeve called out, stepping onto the porch. "Where are you taking him?" "Santa Fe to stand trial," Pike replied. "You can't," Maeve said. "That wire, it's not the only one. Another one just came in. From Redemption Creek, from her father. He's on his way. He's coming here." Jonah looked up, horrified. Pike paused. "Why?" "Because," Maeve said, her voice carrying across the street, "he's not just bringing the law. He's bringing the bounty. And he's not the only one who knows you're here, Marshal. Gideon Rourke is on his way, too. He just wired you to flush the bird. He's coming to collect." Esperanza was no longer a haven. It was a trap, and they were all Marshal included bait. Marshal Pike was no fool. He was a man of the law, but he was also a man of the West. He understood the lethal geometry of the situation. He was in a one-street town with a high-value prisoner, two of the most dangerous men in the territory converging on him, and a hysterical girl who was changing her story every 5 minutes. "Deputy," Pike ordered, "put the prisoner in the cantina cellar. It's the only place in this town with stone walls. Bar the door." "Ma'am," he said to Maeve, "get her inside." "No." Rosalie wrenched her arm from Maeve's grip. "You don't understand my father. He won't wait. He'll burn this town down to get to us." "Let him try," Pike said, checking his rifle. "I am a United States Marshal. I will not be intimidated by a rich rancher or a two-bit bounty hunter." "Rourke is not two-bit," Jonah said quietly, as the deputy shoved him toward the cantina. "He'll let Trent make the noise. Then he'll come in from the back. He's after me, Marshal. The bounty on my head is 5 times what Trent is offering." Pike hesitated. He looked at Jonah, then at Rosalie. He was beginning to see the edges of the truth. "Cellar! Now!" For 3 hours the town of Esperanza held its breath. The sun climbed to its zenith, beating down on the dusty street. Maeve and Rosalie watched from the second-story window of the boarding house. Marshal Pike and his deputy took up positions across the street. At 1:00 p.m. they arrived. It wasn't a posse, it was an army. Barnaby Trent rode at the front, his face a mask of thunder. Beside him, looking cool and detached in his dark suit, was Gideon Rourke. Behind them were nearly 20 men, ranch hands from Trent's payroll, and hired guns Rourke had picked up in Santa Fe. They were a wave of dust and menace, and they stopped at the edge of town. "Marshal Pike!" Trent's voice boomed, amplified by his rage. "I am Barnaby Trent. I am here for my daughter, and the criminal who stole her." Pike stepped into the street, his rifle held at his side. "Mr. Trent, I have the man, Jonah Shaw, in custody. Your daughter is safe. I am escorting them both to Santa Fe to let the circuit judge sort this out. You and your men will disperse." "Disperse?" Rourke's smooth voice cut in. He nudged his horse forward. "Marshal, with all due respect, you have a wanted murderer in that cellar. My men and I are here to support your arrest. We're deputized by the Abilene court to retrieve him. Just hand him over and we'll be on our way. You can have the girl." "Rourke, you liar!" Rosalie screamed from the window. "He's lying, Marshal. He's the one who was there. He killed that woman." Rourke glanced up at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "The girl is clearly confused, traumatized by her ordeal." "I'll take my daughter," Trent roared. "And I'll take him. That's my bounty. I posted it. The Abilene bounty supersedes yours, Barnaby," Rourke said, a bored tone in his voice. "This is official business. Try not to get in the way." The 2 men allies moments before were now staring each other down. They both wanted Jonah, but for different reasons. Trent for revenge, Rourke for silence. "I have the prisoner," Pike shouted, "and I am keeping the prisoner. You both have 1 minute to ride out, or I will open fire for interfering with a federal officer." "Fool Moore." Trent spat. He turned to his men. "He's in the cantina. I want him. I want my daughter. Rourke, stay out of my way." "The bounty is mine," Rourke said simply. He turned to his men. "The prisoner, alive." It was a 3-way standoff. Trent's men charged, yelling, firing at the cantina. Rourke's men fanned out, methodical taking cover, aiming for the marshal. "Get down!" Maeve yelled, pulling Rosalie from the window as bullets ripped through the wood. The street erupted into a war zone. The marshal and his deputy were pinned down instantly. Trent's men were reckless, charging the cantina, but the heavy oak door and stone walls held. "They're going to get him," Rosalie panted, her mind racing. "Rourke will kill the marshal, and my father he'll kill Jonah." "Not if we have anything to say about it," Maeve said. She grabbed her own shotgun. "Stay here!" "No." Rosalie snatched the rifle. "I'm not." She ran down the back stairs. "Rosalie!" Maeve yelled, following her. Rosalie didn't listen. She burst out the back, scrambling over a low fence, staying low, moving toward the alley behind the cantina. She knew Rourke. He wouldn't charge the front. He'd be at the back. She was right. Gideon R. Rourke was there, not with his men, but alone. He had a bundle of dynamite and a fuse. He was calmly preparing to blow the cellar's back wall. "Rourke!" she yelled. He spun, surprised. He hadn't expected her. He smiled a thin, cold expression. "Miss Trent, How proactive. Give me the rifle. Stay away from him. Him Jonah is a ghost, a loose end. He should have stayed buried. He took a step toward her. You, on the other hand, your father is offering a substantial reward for your safe return. I'm a businessman. Give me the rifle and I'll see you're returned to him, mostly unharmed. He's a murderer, Rosalie said, her voice shaking but her hands steady on the gun. He was, Rourke corrected. As was I. As was Jonah. The West is a hard place, my dear. It makes murderers of us all. Now the gun. He lunged. Rosalie didn't think. She just reacted. She pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the alley. Rourke cried out, stumbling back. He hadn't been hit. She'd fired into the ground at his feet. But it was enough. The next one won't be in the dirt, she said, her voice, a low animal growl she didn't recognize. Rourke stared at her, his calculation changing. This was not the girl he'd seen on the ridge. From the street, the shooting intensified. Maeve! Rosalie screamed. Maeve appeared at the end of the alley, shotgun raised. Drop it, Rourke, or I'll paint the wall with you. Rourke looked at the girl, then at the old woman. Outgunned. He raised his hands, a look of profound disgust on his face. This isn't over. The hell it isn't, Maeve said. Inside the cellar, Jonah had heard the shot. He heard Rosalie's voice. He slammed his shoulder against the barred door. Rosalie Pike, let me out. Marshal Pike, his deputy wounded and bleeding, was running out of options. Trent's men were setting fire to the cantina's front porch. Marshal. Rosalie ran from the alley. Rourke is in the back. Maeve has him. But my father. He's burning the building. Pike stared at her. You have Rourke. Yes, now. Let Jonah out. You need him. Pike made a decision. He ran to the cellar door, unbarred it, and tossed Jonah his deputy's spare revolver. Sure. You're deputized. Help me stop this. Jonah burst from the cellar, his eyes scanning the chaos. He saw Barnaby Trent on his horse, directing his men, his face lit by the flames. Father! Rosalie shrieked, running into the middle of the street. The shooting stopped. Everyone froze. Trent's men. Rourke's men who were now leaderless. Marshal Pike and Jonah. Rosalie Trent stood in the dust, smoke, and flames curling behind her. She was covered in dirt, holding a rifle, and her eyes were burning. Father! She screamed again. Barnaby Trent's face was a mixture of rage and confusion. Rosalie, get away from that. That killer come here. No, she said. Her voice was preternaturally calm. I am not coming to you. Not ever again. I am your father. You will obey me. He started to ride his horse toward her. You will stop, she said. She didn't raise the rifle. She just stood her ground. He reined in his horse, confused by this new, defiant creature. You want to know what happened? Marshal Pike. Rosalie called out, her voice ringing across the silent street. You want to know why I ran? It wasn't kidnapping. It was survival. She looked at Trent. Tell them. Tell them what you were doing when Jonah Shaw broke down your door. Tell them what you were holding. Trent's face went white. Rosalie, you are hysterical. You don't know what you're saying. You were holding your belt, she said, her voice breaking but gaining strength. Your heavy belt, the one with the silver buckle, the one you've used on me since Mother died, you raised it. You were going to strike me. The town of Esperanza was silent. Trent's own hired guns were looking at him, their expressions shifting. She's lying, Trent roared. She's insane. She's protecting her lover. Am I? Rosalie said. She dropped Jonah's duster from her shoulders, letting it fall to the ground. She turned her back to the street, to her father, to everyone. Then where did I get these? Her dress was torn from the escape, and the simple cotton shift she wore underneath was thin. Across her back, still visible, were the faint yellow and purple outlines of old scars. A constellation of his rage. A collective gasp went up. Marshal Pike stared, his face hardening into granite. Even Trent's own men looked away, disgusted. He did that," Rosalie said, turning back, tears streaming down her face. "Because I dropped my bonnet in the street. And Jonah Shaw, he stopped him. He broke the belt, and he took me away. That is the truth." Barnaby Trent was undone. His power, built on fear and silence, evaporated in the daylight. "You," he stammered, looking at the faces of his own men who were now backing away from him. "Barnaby Trent," Marshal Pike said, stepping forward, his pistol leveled. "You are under arrest for assault, for attempted murder, for hiring a private army and attacking a federal officer." "You can't arrest me," Trent bellowed. "You own nothing here," Pike said. Trent, his world collapsing, let out an animal roar. He spurred his horse not at Pike but at Rosalie. He would kill her. He would wipe this shame from the earth. He never made it. Jonah Shaw raised his pistol and fired. Not at Trent, at the horse. The animal screamed and fell, pinning Trent's leg beneath it. He was trapped, screaming and cursing in the dust. It was over. The aftermath was quiet and swift. Barnaby Trent's hired men surrendered their weapons to Marshal Pike without a single complaint. They were just ranch hands, paid for a fight, not to defend a monster. Trent himself was dragged from under his horse, his leg broken, his power shattered. He was bound and locked in the same cellar he had tried to burn. Gideon Rourke was a different matter. Maeve and Rosalie marched him into the street, his hands tied. "Marshal," Rourke said, his suit dusty, his pride wounded. "This is a misunderstanding. I am a bonded agent of the court." "You're a liar," Pike snapped. "And an accessory. That Abilene warrant. You're on it too, aren't you?" Rourke's eyes narrowed. "I remember the file," Pike said. "The Cimarron boys. 4 men. 1 died. 1 Jonah Shaw vanished. 1 was caught. And 1, the leader, G. Rourke. You didn't just witness that bank robbery, did you? You planned it." Jonah stepped forward. "He did, Marshal. He's the one who used too much dynamite. He killed that teller. I ran. He's been hunting me ever since, afraid I'd talk." Rourke looked at Jonah, a true venomous hatred in his eyes. "You should have stayed gone, Jonah." "I'm glad I didn't," Jonah said. "Gideon Rourke." Pike declared, "You're under arrest for the murder in Abilene, and for conspiracy, and for attacking a federal officer. You'll hang." As the deputy took Rourke away, Rosalie and Jonah finally stood face to face. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only exhaustion and a painful, uncertain silence. You told him you kidnapped me," she whispered. "He had the warrant." Jonah said, his voice rough. "The murder charge. If you said you were with me, you'd be his accomplice. I couldn't trade your cage for one of my making." "So you were just going to hang?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "It was my past, Rosalie. Not yours." She looked at this man, this drifter, this outlaw, this hero. He had seen her truth when no one else would, and she had in turn saved him by speaking her own. She stepped forward, and for the first time she touched him. Not in fear, not in desperation. She put her hand on his chest. "Your past is done. Mine is too." Marshal Pike approached them, his hat in his hands. "Miss Trent, I am truly sorry for what you've endured. My office will see that your father is transported to a federal prison. He will never bother you again." "Thank you, Marshal," Rosalie said. Pike turned to Jonah. "Sure, you're a complicated man. You're still wanted for that robbery. Technically, I should still take you in. Jonah nodded. I understand. But, Pike continued, a small smile playing on his lips, my deputy is wounded. I have 2 high-priority prisoners to transport, and my report will state that you were killed in the fire. Jonah stared. What? My report will say that the notorious outlaw Jonah Shaw, seeing the error of his ways, sacrificed his own life to help me apprehend the dangerous criminal Gideon Rourke. That his body was tragically consumed when the cantina burned. It's the least I can do. Pike looked at Rosalie. It seems, Miss Trent, that you are on your own. Jonah Shaw is dead. Your father is in custody. You are a free woman. I trust you'll find your way. Rosalie understood. She smiled, a real radiant smile. Yes, Marshal, I think I will. Pike tipped his hat. Maeve, this town owes you. Just pay for the damages, Marshal. Maeve grumbled, but she was smiling too. That evening, as the sun set, Marshal Pike and his deputy rode out of Esperanza, his 3 prisoners, Trent Rourke, and Trent's wounded man, bound and secured. 2 horses stood waiting at the edge of town. Maeve had given them to Rosalie and Jonah. Where will you go? Maeve asked. North, Jonah said. Maybe Oregon. I hear you can start fresh there. You can start fresh anywhere, son, Maeve said, so long as you stop running. Jonah nodded. He looked at Rosalie. She was no longer wearing the tattered remains of her old life. She was wearing simple trousers and a shirt Maeve had given her, her hair cut short, practical. She looked strong. She hugged Maeve tightly. Thank you. For everything. You did it yourself, child. You just needed a push. Rosalie mounted her horse, settling into the saddle with an ease she hadn't possessed 2 weeks ago. Jonah swung up onto his. They looked at each other, the desert painted in hues of orange and purple around them. There were no promises made, no declarations of love. There was just a shared understanding, a partnership. Jonah Shaw, the ghost, and Rosalie. Trent, the survivor, turned their horses north and rode out of Esperanza, not into the sunset, but toward the dawn. The dust settles, but the story never truly ends. Rosalie and Jonah rode out of Esperanza, but their journey was just beginning. They found that true freedom isn't just escaping a monster. It's breaking the chains inside your own mind. Barnaby Trent's reign of terror ended not with a bullet to his heart, but with a voice that had been silent for far too long, that finally spoke its truth. What did you think of Rosalie's incredible transformation? Have you ever seen courage like that, to stand up when every fiber of your being tells you to hide? That moment when she turned her back, it gives me chills every time. Let us know your favorite part in the comments below. Your stories and thoughts mean the world to us. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of courage and the hope of a new beginning, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more true-to-life dramas. We'll see you in the next one.